We live in an incredibly fast-paced world where we go to work, we do our best, we stay busy, we go to social events every day, but we also go to the gym and we hit it really hard. And then we come home and then we hustle our side job, or you have a really difficult relationship, an angry boss, surrounded by really demanding people, and sometimes it just feels too much. We start getting foggy, anxious, depressed, lethargic, and possibly very numb. And all of that's burnout and possibly trauma too. I think the time that this was the most highlighted was during the pandemic. And for the first time for so many of us, we had to put our fast-paced lifestyles to a halt. And it just simply didn't feel right, or it felt a bit weird. Although there was a lot of other problems associated with the pandemic, especially feeling isolated during the lockdown. Like I've mentioned in chapter 2, everything comes in balance. Where there is a yin and yang, there is an opportunity in a time of pain. So what happens when our brain goes through trauma? So we have two main stores of memory in our brain. One is the amygdala, and it's this little tiny pea-sized part near the pituitary gland. And then there is our hippocampus, which is not that far away, but it is much bigger. And the hippocampus is a store of long-term and short-term memory. So when we experience something, we know the date, we know the time, and our opinions can change about it. And also we can access this memory anytime we want. An example of how our interpretation of the same memory can change. Let's say we create a painting back in 2015, and it was about a fantasy world. And at the time when you painted it, it was very enchanting, very magical when you did make it. And it was the best painting that you ever made in your entire life. But now when you look at that painting again, you might have the different approach to it, because you've improved your skills over time, you've learned different techniques, you've got more tools to really create something even more magical, and you've created far better designs along the way until your current day. And that mediocre painting that you now think is mediocre, but before you used to think it was the best thing in the world. And then we move on to the amygdala, and that is responsible for storing information and memories for when you are in trauma, in danger, or something scary is happening. And not to mention stress as well, because one thing that is particular to the hippocampus is that there are so many cortisol stress receptors, and it will not store any memories during that traumatic time in that hippocampus area. The hippocampus has many cortisol stress receptors, and it makes it incredibly sensitive to any stresses, any trauma events. If there's anything scary happening, then it will not be able to function at all. So once there's a lot of stress hormone cortisol in the body, then the hippocampus just shuts off, and the amygdala is responsible to turn on and store that memory. So when we experience such a scary event, our body produces adrenaline, and then we start getting the fight or flight response. And that's when we start feeling on edge, we have a rapid heart rate, we start sweating, we start trembling. And the difference with the amygdala when we store information in there is that we don't necessarily remember the time. We can't really change the opinion of that memory very easily. Or if we recall a memory from the amygdala, that's when we get triggered and it comes back to us, and it's always very scary and tense. And that is what we call trauma. And that trauma pumps out the adrenaline again. Even though the actual trauma in itself is not happening, our memories are coming back to haunt us again. And that leads us to feeling really anxious, really depressed, and feeling very low. Or it can sometimes make you feel a bit numb. Now, the amygdala isn't something that is very flawed in nature, but it's actually a very useful survival mechanism. Back in the caveman days, when people used to go out to hunt, forage, and find their food to eat, sometimes you can find a predator along the way, and you need to either fight that predator or run the hell out of the way. And this is when we really need our adrenaline push, because adrenaline, which is not just for anxiety and depression, but actually it's supposed to push us to our limits and have our natural superpowers to be able to fight the animal, or to be able to run far away and jump through mountains to escape whatever predator is going to attack you. But usually in these situations, you have the stressor there where you are being chased by a predator, but once once you find your safety, you have a recovery period where let the adrenaline settle again and you are finally living in peace until the next predator comes along. And that is what let us survive as a human race and survive for so many generations. So now when it comes to stress in our everyday lives, let's give an example in a healthy scenario. For example, we're giving a speech and we're giving this speech in front of hundreds and thousands of people. You may have a reaction where your adrenaline kicks in because you are super scared, you're super nervous, but straight after the talk and you recover, you start to feel okay again. The more that you do it, the less that the stress response will kick in again, because this is exposing yourself to a stress that is not life-threatening. The more your body realizes that it's not something that you need to be afraid of, and then your body's response to pushing adrenaline out there becomes to a minimal. But in the case of something that is incredibly traumatic, for example, your boss yells at you in front of the whole office and everybody can see and hear it, and it's really embarrassing to go through such a thing. But over time, sometimes you get really bad triggers in the office, or even just seeing your boss or seeing the colleagues around you or seeing the office in itself. That can already be a trigger to that awful memory that's stored in your amygdala, and it just fires at you spontaneously. So your body responds to the same thing to triggers as well as the actual event itself, where your body will pump out a lot of adrenaline even though the experience isn't there. When we become subjected to so much stress and our brains become overloaded, our neurons in the hippocampus can start to get a little bit impaired. And this can lead to stress-induced hippocampal dysfunction and also memory impairment. Usually memory loss from short-term stress is not that critical because it's reversible and the memory loss is usually very short-lived. But it's actually when it becomes prolonged, that's when it gets pretty dangerous, because prolonged stress not only makes the neurons dysfunctional, but it can actually end up killing them. And you would see in MRI scans that your hippocampus can actually shrink over the course of depression, or you have Cushing syndrome, or you have PTSD. All of their hippocampus volume starts to diminish when they are exposed to more stressors. So far, all of these things are actually something that I learned myself through my therapist. And that was going through a really traumatic time of an incident that happened, which I'm not 100% confident in sharing right now. So going back to our 3 aspects of human intelligence, we have our communication, and that's how we talk to each other about things, and it's very descriptive. We also have our emotional feelings, and this is how we react. Our body chemistry is being altered to feel such things. And then we have our soul, which is the powerhouse to our core values. And this is what we use to describe our purpose, and it powers our intuition so that we can find fulfillment in what we do. Our brain perceives things in the world, and that is where we have an emotional response to something, but also an interpretation to what we can observe. And I think there are 2 different tests. One is visual and one is sound. And I think it gives you a really good test of seeing what you can hear in the first place, but then you can change your alterations and thoughts about it.
Okay, I'm going to play a clip. Listen carefully to this. All right, now I'm going to play a different clip.
The juice of lemons makes fine punch.
Now I'm going to play the first clip you heard. It's like a horror movie, isn't it?
So that one, in terms of the sound, it was quite impeccable, because at first all you hear is just a jumbled mix of thunder, but then you start to associate the words that were actually said within it, and it's fumbly. And then this is the second one where it talks about your visuals.
Have a look at this. Right now, your brain is working like crazy. Your neurons are firing like mad, trying to make meaning out of this so that you see something other than black and white blobs. Your brain is sifting through a lifetime of experience, making thousands of guesses at the same time, weighing the probabilities, trying to answer the question, what is this most like? Not what is it, but what is this most like in my past experience? All right, so now many of you see a snake. And why is that? Because as your brain is sifting through your past experience, there's new knowledge there. the knowledge that came from the photograph. And what's really cool is that that knowledge, which you just acquired moments ago, is changing how you experience these blobs right now. So your brain is constructing the image of a snake where there is no snake.
So this one is pretty cool because I had no idea it was a snake at all. It was looking like there were just a few characters in there, maybe a little mouse or something. And then once you overlay the pictures and then take it back away, you can see the snake really easily because you've attained another piece of information that you've never had before. And that comes with experience. So the more you experience, that's how we are able to interpret things a bit differently given the experience we have. So our brains have been developed to interpret, analyze, and form networks to interlink our emotional senses and our communicational senses together. And then it's our soul aspect that really links them together to have an interpretation of them. So if you go through an experience and then you can alter your thoughts about them emotionally and attach them to different emotions, that is what we can call emotional intelligence. An example to help explain this better, we're going back to the speech again in front of a lot of people. When we give a speech, we have an adrenaline response and it can make us feel very anxious, very edgy, very scared. And our heartbeat is racing like wildfire, your legs are trembling so much. It gives you the signal of you are very worried, you're very scared to go up on the stage. But if you think about it, sometimes we need that adrenaline response, and some people will also see it as a positive because if you have the adrenaline response, then you are at the peak of your ability because you are extra sharp in knowing what to say, knowing what to express to everyone. You just had to channel that bundle of energy from anxiety to something positive, and that it will give you that edge to it. And in a way, it's kind of preparing for battle. You need that adrenaline pump. So then you're going to perform better, you're going to speak better and speak more clearly and very bold and strongly. So this is actually an exercise that you can do. It's not very easy at the beginning. I admit that I really struggled doing this at the beginning because you're just so clouded in thought, but the more that you practice it, the more it will help you along the way and the more you get better at it. And it can be a very healing and beneficial process. So as Lisa said in her TED Talk, having more control of your emotions comes with responsibility, and that means that we have more power to our emotions than we initially thought. In terms of Lisa's research, you can actually start to see that you have a little bit more control than you think. So it's more about trying to engage in as much experiences as possible, but at the same time, don't let one emotion be attached to a particular thing if it's not life-threatening. So to conclude this chapter, we've talked about our bodily response to stress and how the different segments of the brain can process stress in healthy levels and also in traumatic levels. But most importantly, that our minds are super incredible and that we have the power to retrain our thoughts, and that is what can help us progress us in our careers. So this is the last of my 4-part series, and I hope you enjoyed it. I will actually post a bonus video. I'll put in any questions and answers that have been put in throughout the forum or that I've seen in other comments on my personal Instagram. Then I can go through each and every one of them in 2 weeks' time. And thank you for joining and taking part of this series. I really hope that this was informative, and I hope that my research findings was something interesting. It's not all perfect, to be honest. I'm just finding random things here and there, but that is the beauty of it and that's the fun of it. And nothing is completely perfect, but I'm here to share with you what I found and whether you found it interesting or not. If you want to see more of this type of content, then please do comment below and like this video, because that will give me a good indication that this is getting a good hype. Also, if you just want to enjoy my luxury fashion, then of course in these new videos, then you can check them out there, and I will see you there. Bye.